So Benedict Gaster will be presenting In Between, Ghostly Control Through Slowness and the Relational.
Thanks.
Take it away.
Yeah, thanks. Although you notice I crossed the slowness out because when I finally got around to writing the talk a week or so, a week or so ago, so slowness is in my practice. I make music with tape, and I'm really interested in memory and time and how that can affect, particularly working with analog and how it can slow down. So I want to include that in every talk, but as I wrote the talk, I realized it didn't make any sense, and I took it out. So anyway, I've changed the title now, right? And I'm just going to talk a little bit. So this talk is much more just about some thoughts that we've been having in our research group and discussions. But to be truthful, when it kind of comes back, I guess it's all about entanglement and space, that my understanding of this stuff is still completely and 100% unknown. I do research when I don't know what I'm doing. And this research is really inspired by what my wife has taught me over the last 20 years about feminism, about Donald Haraway. We lived in Santa Cruz, and we took a trip to Donald Haraway's house and pilgrimage in 2011. I'd never heard of her. I'd be the first to admit I'd never heard of her. My wife had been inspired by her for years. And just in the last couple of years, it's the last couple of years to me, but of course this happened in 2019, Ramberger, he kind of started talking about this idea of entanglement and Barard's work, which of course goes back to Butler's work and goes back to Haraway's work, and how that could be a fourth wave in HCI. And finally, I could talk about my work to my wife, and we could have a dialogue where it was talking about her work at the same time as well, which was really exciting and things. But I'm still learning and understanding that. And I think when I started to think about this stuff more, and when this quote came to mind, from one of my favorite books when I was a kid, The Little Prince, and it's beautiful pictures, but also it's kind of like, this idea that what makes the desert beautiful, said The Little Prince, is where somewhere that a well hides in it. And it's not that we're searching for the well, but it's just that there's this space that we just see as this barren kind of thing, often predicted, particularly if you live in the global north and things like that. But actually, there's so much to explore and to find. And if we don't think about it as just one thing, but we can think about it as inherent histories that evolve and live, and pre-colonial, there was histories that may not exist now, but we can look back and be inspired by them, and we can learn from that. And I just think it really got me thinking, is that space is not just something that we pass through. And this is not my quote. I didn't come up with, I wish I'd come up with this, but this is from Doreen Massey, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, who's a geographer and feminist and socialist and so forth. She was big friends with Jeremy Corbyn. And I've really been interested in field recording for years, and I've done field recordings in my practice and everything. And then I realized, I went to this field recording conference, and they've been talking about space in terms of geography and about its histories and about how we interact with it in an entangled manner forever, at least for the last 10, 20 years, in a way that certainly I haven't as a computer scientist. My background's in GPUs, mathematics, wasn't thinking about that. And so I started to ponder on this some more and think about it, how it would reflect into my work. So I have been designing musical interfaces, not necessarily musical instruments, but musical interfaces for quite a while, and building them and just purchasing technology. The previous talk mentioned Amazon, and I bought parts of Amazon, and maybe I wouldn't today, and so as I've thought more about it, I've become concerned about the fact that digital technology and its complexities, and we're ever expanding. We build new servers, we fill them up, we have to build new servers. We've had ChatGPT mentioned over and over again, and how much that compute power, how much it costs to train it, so on and so on. We all know the stories for that. But I think there's also these inherent other things. There's these infrastructural complexities that are inherent in digital technologies, which we've talked a lot about today. But there's also the social political complexity induced by them, right? And our need for them, the way that we use them, the fact that not having a smartphone can be a hindrance now. And some of my kids, they get so much from using their phones and interacting, on Tumblr and Discord, but they also get quite a lot of pain from it. One of them is very anxious, they're trans, and they've just had such a hard time. And I don't know if it's the internet that helps them through it or whether it draws them back. I'm not at all, I think it's a wonderful, amazing thing, but there's definitely a complexity that is introduced that I didn't have as a child. And I haven't gone through some of the difficulties and changes that they have. I didn't have that. And but there's this ontological complexity hindered by the digitalization, that they don't have very many friends, and I don't want to talk about them in this talk too much, but they do have lots of friends online. There's kind of a different way they do it. And it's just the way that the individuals interact with their and relate to their environment has changed extensively. And I think when we're designing musical instruments, and thinking about the design of any digital technology, we can think about that. And I think Doreen Massey, so this talk is just about that you should go away and read her book from 2006 called For Space, is argued that this notion of relational space, the way that we relate to space, it's not like some map that you just draw on. You know, she starts off her book with this amazing kind of description of Cortez marching to, you know, what is now Mexico City, terrible, terrible outcomes that all had from it. And she argues that he would never have done that if he hadn't thought of it as just being some space on a map that he could take, that he could walk along. If it was thought about the histories that had been involved, it thought about that the history isn't predetermined or fixed. It has a whole set of things that have evolved over all these times. And she argues that it's, you know, a relational space, a space that we should interact, is one where its history is not predetermined. Okay, it's not fixed. One where multiple possible histories can coexist at one time. Just imagine if we thought that back then in the 1590 or whenever it was that he decided to do that. And I think I've then, with dialogue with my students and other people, just been thinking about what this would mean in my work, and not building interfaces where I buy the latest Tinsy or the latest this, but actually reflect instead, think about what is around me, what can I use that I already have, already own, and more importantly, think about if, you know, things I've got, if we just think about things differently. So here's, you know, 1972, I guess, 1973, is a picture of someone who took something that had been completely invented. For one thing, playing back recordings from, you know, folk songs or musicals or whatever, and reimagined it in a way that his background, his history, his moment in time allowed him to do. You know, something that I wouldn't have done because I hadn't got the same history of him. And so we could imagine it in a way that was just, it opened up possibilities that, you know, has changed the face of the world, you know. And of course, the phone has changed the face of the world, maybe not for such a good thing. And so what I've been thinking about is what happens if we start to think about interface design via circling, I call it a circular making practice. So again, it's related to circular economies. And I'm really interested in this idea that interfaces can be representative. Now, I can't define for you today what I mean by representative. It's still under flux, and it will mean different things for different people. It means one thing for me, one thing for you. But there should be some notion of representative. What happens if we only use reclaimed or repurposed materials as we build these interfaces? And as you'll see, it's really tricky when you start to put these constraints on, right? If you don't want to have any environmental impact, you want everything to be recycled. In the world that we live in today, it's really, really hard. Particularly, I don't want to stop using my computer. I don't want to stop making digital music. You know, I can play the guitar barely. I can play the piano a bit better, but I can make quite a lot of good stuff in Ableton, you know, or in Max. Oh, okay. So I started to build interfaces with these things. This is my first one with buttons. We're just making stuff around. We have this cardboard pulp printing mechanism that we do. This is casted. This is a button. This is a tape. So this is a representative interface. I wanted to make a piece that's based on tape. For some reason, it's cut off the top. If you could see the top there, there would be a max patch up the top there where I've got these noise folding algorithms that I've been developing and playing with. That's got a little piezo mic that you can flick it. And the idea is here that the Pico that's used to do the control and interface with Max was the same one that I used with the button, okay? Because it's made with materials that I don't necessarily feel too attached to, it's completely biodegradable, I can take it apart afterwards and throw it away. Okay, I'm gonna have to move quickly. This is a talk or an interface I'm making around talking about space, but in terms of like lithium mines. And so this represents a lithium mine. These are kind of wall that we found on a farm close to us that dies run away now, but it's all using this cardboard process. Everything in this process is found except for the phone, which is obviously my phone. But coming back to the AI thing, and I'll finish up with this slide, that when I was making this and working out I could do the position of the little plastic dinosaur on the thing, people were like, oh, you could use Wikinator, or you could use even more than that. You could train a neural net and do that. I was like, my gosh, that seems like a lot of computational power to do that. I'm pretty good at image processing. My background was in GPUs, so I wrote a little color matching algorithm that could do it just by using a blur and changing it. It was quite straightforward. But it was only by me saying, no, I don't want to use AI because of its ethical issues that I have with it, that I kind of thought. And that's what I talk about in Doreen Massey. I think when she thinks about space, she has a lot to offer us in opening. So if you take anything away from my talk, go and read her work, because she is absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, she's died a few years back now, but her work is really worth reading. And if you are interested in Barrard and Haraway and stuff, she is amazing kind of juxtaposition and compost. And I finished. I mean,
Really good timing. Okay. Yeah. So any questions? I have one.
okay.
Hopefully it won't open some awful can of worms. I think, and it's probably felt by all of us who are working in academia, but also by everybody in industry, most definitely. It's definitely a choice that's to be made. I'm not going to buy anything off of Amazon to do my prototyping. I'm going to try to make everything biodegradable, etc. What do you think in terms of not having that feeling of FOMO or the panic of I have to get there first because I need to publish or I need to sell my thing so I can pay my rent and all that? I think we get caught up in these structures. We can't really afford to think slowly. Do you have any thoughts or things that have worked maybe for you that have been helpful to keep you on that path?
Well, I think the caveat is that I'm quite, I'm privileged. I've already got my professorship. I don't need that. My PhD students publish lots, and I do publish, but maybe not as rapidly, so I've been able to make those choices. Yeah. But the key thing to all of it is that we have a lab which has bought stuff over the last few years, and I can just, so I don't have a great answer there. I think it's really difficult. Every time I do that, when I make those things, I make those choices, and I get frustrated. They don't look as pretty as my beautiful interfaces I used to make. But is that an issue? I don't know. They're not as robust. So there's a whole layer of things that I'm picking apart at the moment. Yeah. And I don't think there is well, I don't, in my privileged position, have an answer for that. I think it's
it's interesting to consider of like, maybe it can be one thing for one person to get up. Maybe we can find some ways to uplift other people as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's what I want to do. My work very much about is engaging.
You've been a lovely audience. I'm going to switch over to amazing Anna Jambo, who's going to take care of the rest of this session. So here you go.
Thank you.